There is a Cornish fishing village called Mevagissey in the UK. It's very beautiful and gives rise to quite a lot of folklore. And here we have the tale of the Merlins. Everyone in Mevagissey was connected with fishing, and everyone connected with fishing had heard of the Neptune of the Cornish Sea, Buckaboo, and how he commanded his 9 little men to row their longboat to a large pool near the cliffs around here to gather a rare plant called the Weed of Health. They also knew that whoever was fortunate to see this wonderful little boat curved like a moon on her back and to bring her into Mevagissey harbour would ensure good luck for himself and for the whole village. Gradually over time, this piece of folklore was forgotten, except by old fishermen like Merlin Lagassic, who in turn passed it on to his grandson, also named Merlin. Young Merlin was so entranced by the story that he searched every incoming tide for the little boat, especially as the fish had become scarce, the fisherfolk poor, and most went about permanently hungry. But the fishing catch grew smaller, and both the older and younger Merlin longed for the little boat to come into Buckaboo's basin. If only they could get hold of it, all their problems would be solved. But despite their wishing and watching, the little boat did not come into the pool. Fishing almost stopped. Desperation was setting in. One day, young Merlin was sent to Polstreath Beach to dig for bait with the usual instruction to keep a lookout for the little boat. The weather was perfect, the sea was calm, and the mermen would have no difficulty getting into Mevagissey Bay. So urgently had this been impressed on him that instead he went to Buckaboo's Basin, where, though the tide was flowing fast, the sea was rougher than he had been led to expect. The waves were already breaking against the cliffs. The conditions were not right for the longboat. It wouldn't be long before all the people of Mevagissey died of hunger. No sooner were such thoughts formulated than he heard a sound like someone laughing. Or was it a gull calling out, as they always were over these cliffs? The laughter was followed by a chorus of tiny voices singing. This was certainly not a gull, but it might be, just might be, Buckaboo's little men coming into the basin at last. Merlin climbed up the side of the rock, and there in the pool was a little boat no bigger than a toy and curved like the moon on her back. It was full of tiny men, rowing straight towards where Merlin was crouching. This is what he had been looking out for. Here was his opportunity to save Mevagissey and the fishing. But how could he get hold of the boat? The little men were so intent on their rowing they didn't notice Merlin. Suddenly the one at the helm pointed to something glowing under the rim of the basin. "The Weed of Health," he called out. The others stopped and looked at the scarlet plant with its bright berries. But it was beyond their reach. They couldn't swim to it. They couldn't climb the rocks like the men of Mevagissey. They couldn't hope to take the Weed of Health back to their leader Buckaboo. Dismay turned to despair. Now was Merlin's chance. He let himself gently over the seaweed-covered side of the basin, but just as he was stretching out his hand, one of the crew spotted him, gave a cry of alarm, and the boat moved beyond his grasp. Undaunted, Merlin jumped into the sea to try to get hold of the boat. When he came to the surface, it had disappeared. He swam about the basin, searching under the seaweed and peering into the rocky holes, but to no avail. Now it was Merlin who was crestfallen. He couldn't go home and face his family after missing such an opportunity. As he sat on the rim of the basin, he heard the laugh again, the same as before, but now coming up from the pool. And there he saw the tiny boat on the exact spot from where it had disappeared. The helmsman and crew began to taunt Merlin, and he had to accept that they'd made him look foolish. But he was only trying to help the poor folks in Mevagissey. He told the little men the story his grandfather had told him and the reasons for his actions, and it was during this discussion that an idea began to emerge. Merlin might not be able to bring prosperity back to Mevagissey, but he could get the little merman the Weed of Health if they would tell him when the time was right to pick it, for it only blossoms and ripens 2 hours before the sun moves westward. The 9 little men huddled together, whispering. Then the helmsman straightened up, saluted Merlin, and declared solemnly, "In the name of His Majesty, Buckaboo of the Cornish Sea, we accept your kind offer to gather him the Weed of Health. In return, we will make you an offer, subject to certain conditions, which will allow you to take us to our longboat in Mevagissey harbour, and so bring good luck to the fishing there." Merlin could hardly believe what he was hearing, but the helmsman assured him of their good faith. The conditions, though, were to be strictly adhered to. The moment he has gathered the Weed of Health and dropped it into the pool, he must leave. He must return to his village and stay there until they rowed into the quay, which will be just before the tide turns. He must not tell anyone, not even his parents or his grandfather, of them being in the basin or of their promise to come to the harbour. Merlin was confident he could adhere to the conditions. Flinging himself flat on the basin's rim, Merlin plucked as much weed of health as he could reach and dropped it into the pool. The little men stowed it away, and Merlin set off back to Mevagissey. In the distance, he could hear the little men singing, and as he ran up the streets, he felt like singing too. Just as the helmsman had warned, it was indeed difficult for him to not tell everyone what he'd seen and what was going to happen. It was worse when he got home, as his grandfather questioned him about where he'd been. It was best for him to get out of the house again, so Merlin made for the top of the hill above the village. From here he could see the fishing boats returning, and though they looked so picturesque, it was obvious to him that this was another poor catch. The sun dropped behind the hill, its light reflected in the clouds towards Godden Haven, as he made his way down the hill and through the narrow, twisting streets. Everyone had gone to bed. It was the best place for miserable, starving people. But Merlin could not sleep and was soon out of the house again, racing to the quay, watched by an old pair of eyes from their cottage window. In the distance, a clock struck the hour. It was later than he had thought. The tide had already turned. Merlin had kept to the conditions, but would the little men keep to their promise? He heard a burst of laughter, and looking down, saw a longboat with her crew on the dark water. He ran down the stone steps, and encouraged by the 9 little men, took hold of the little boat and brought her safely inside Mevagissey Quay until she lay beside his father's fishing boat. Now he would be able to tell people how he had won good luck from Mevagissey fishing. Then he remembered what he and all the people of Mevagissey had suffered, and as he turned away, saw his grandfather walking towards him. Old Merlin had guessed what was afoot, but by the time he arrived at the quay, could see nothing except the fishing fleet riding the still water. It was then he noticed something glowing softly on the horizon. Neither of them were ever sure what it was, but as young Merlin turned away from the open sea, he thought he heard the little men singing in the distance. All Mevagissey was in a ferment of excitement the next morning as young Merlin's story got about. Some believed it, some did not. Old Merlin merely replied that time would tell. And it did. From that night, good times returned to the village, to its fishing folk, and more particularly to the Legassic household, which became very prosperous. Though in other areas of Cornwall fishing catches remained meagre, in Mevagissey there was never again any need for anybody to go to bed on an empty stomach.